Can you still get into Perth for under $550 in 2024? We don't want you in the dark on where to look, so we've armed you with a list of 51 areas under $550, so you can get a better understanding of the market with the confidence you're armed with the goods.
Say hello to my little friend!
Not only that, but we've got 5 top investors and industry experts sharing their top pick, their bottom pick, and how much longer they think's left in the Perth property market. Our pro lineup kicks off with Simon Loo, over a decade in the industry and a personal property portfolio worth over $20 million.
When I was looking at the list, I was kind of hitting the candy shop for both the good and the bad.
Fouhy, having built a multi-million-dollar portfolio and now absolutely killing it in the buyer's agency space.
You're arriving well into a party that's been going for a few years. This area must be good because so-and-so invested there. Yeah, like 2 years ago.
Jarrad Mahon, a property investor and property manager with a rare boots-on-the-ground perspective of the Perth property market.
For investors, our rental yields are still very attractive and our vacancy rates are still very, very low.
Bill Childs, self-made 20-something millionaire. This guy's accomplished a lot at a young age and is approaching Perth from an investor and mortgage broker's perspective.
So it's very hard to see it going from doing 43% in the last year to doing 0% in the next year. You need the data and you need the actual fundamentals of the area.
And finally, InvestorKit's lead research analyst, Junge, the woman that holds the keys to the property data kingdom, shares what she thinks hot and what's not.
When we analyze property markets, it's important to check everything instead of relying on single data points. There is still a lot to catch up with. That's a good thing. Perth is definitely going to
5 property experts, 51 areas, the good, the bad, and how much is left in the Perth property market in 2024. If you want a copy of the 51 areas under 550 today, there'll be a link somewhere below so you can get your hands on the full list. But for now, my name's Todd Sloan. This is the Pizza and Property Podcast, and you're listening to my expert panel discussion with Simon Loo, Fouhy, Jarrad Mahon, Bill Childs, and Jungar. Let's kick things off with Simon Loo. Simon Loo, how you going, mate?
I'm good, Todd. How are you?
Yeah, very good, man. We're talking about Perth. Top pick, bottom pick, under 550. It's almost seeming not impossible, but getting a lot tougher these days, mate. I think there's going to be a lot of people eager to hear your opinion on this. But before we get into it, is there anything you wanted to sort of set the stage with on the list and the picks before we jump in?
I think it's a pretty diverse list, you know, of different areas, different suburbs, different stats as well. You know, when I was looking at the list, I was kind of hitting the candy shop, you know, for both the good and the bad. There were several suburbs that I thought was quite good, and there were several suburbs that I thought was horrendous. So we might talk about a couple of them, not just one or the other. Yeah, overall, I definitely still think Perth is on an upwards trend, which you know, we might talk about a little bit later as well.
All right, so you don't have a top pick; you've got top picks.
I've got 2 top picks. The very first one is a lovely suburb by the name of Butler. Which is on the north side of Perth. It's in the city of Wanneroo, not Kangaroo, Wanneroo. It's 37 Ks north of the CBD. Some quick stats. It's 6 days on market at the moment in terms of days on market. The average yield is about 5.5% rental yield. But if you're getting good deals, you should be getting more high yield than that. Why I think it's a good pick. So, you know, a lot of listeners will know about Wanneroo, right? Clarkson, Butler, Queen's Rock, all those kinds of places has been quite popular, you know, in recent years. One of the things that I still think it's still got a lot of legs left, so to speak, in terms of growth is, number one, it's right next to the beach. So you've got some really amazing beaches, very close to Butler, like Queen's Beach. And what a lot of people don't know, or maybe are not talked about very much, is it's actually better than a lot of the beaches that are a lot further closer to the city. So areas like Layton Beach, in Fremantle or North Fremantle.
If I can just quickly jump in, when you say better, what do you mean? Like you're talking better as in like the actual beach is better, or better as in like it's got a Bondi kind of like atmosphere to it? What's better?
It's just more appealing, you know, visually more appealing. It's nicer feeling. I know we're talking about very emotional factors here, but people who buy and live in areas like Butler are obviously looking at the beach lifestyle, you know, being right next to the ocean. So it's just such a nice place to be if you've ever been there. And it is attracting a lot of owner occupiers. There's a lot of gentrification happening in the area. The Wanneroo City Council has put in place what they call the East Wanneroo District Plan, which is the development plan where they're converting, I think it was like 8,000 hectares worth of land in the area and changing them to 10,000 dwellings by 2031. And a lot of people think, oh, that's a lot of supply. But the supply is justified because there's just so many people wanting to live there, right? And in fact, all these new builds that are building, from what I've seen in recent booms, it's actually going to drag up some of the existing properties because it costs a lot more money to build these new properties. The new properties are most likely going to be a much smaller blocks. The houses are potentially going to be quite smaller as well in terms of floor plans. So some of the near new stuff in Butler, I think, will be quite sought after in the near future.
Okay, so people that are still wanting like a decent sized home, 600 square meter block, that kind of thing, you feel that that's then going to have more of a pull because they're not going to exist in the newer developments, but they will in Butler.
Correct. And look, it's such a scarce factor, to be able to still buy a house, 3-4 bedroom house right next to the beach, and also within, 30-40 minutes to the city. I think you can't do that anywhere else in Australia. You can't do that in any of the capital cities and even the regional areas. You wouldn't be able to do that for that kind of price point. So I think there's definitely a lot of steam left there as well.
All right. Now you said picks. Forever the deal maker. I asked for your top pick, but you're giving me a few. What's the second top pick on there, man?
Brookdale, Armidale.
Brookdale.
So Brookdale is a suburb in Armidale that's about 27 k's from the CBD.
Yep.
Very similar stats. Six days on market. Days on market at the moment. Around about 6% yield, which is a little bit higher yielding than Butler. But I don't think it's to anyone's surprise that the city of Armidale is one of the fastest growing centres in Australia at the moment. The state government, they've pumped a lot of money into redeveloping Armidale, new sort of business and commercial opportunities. It's home to the largest shopping centre in WA. They've just did a $350 million development with 70 new stalls and a commercial hub and all that kind of stuff. But very similar to Butler, it's just a super affordable place. One interesting about Armidale / Gosnells area is it's always had a bit of a bad rap, right? It's an older suburb. It's had a history of unemployment and crime and all that kind of stuff. But if you venture further south into areas like Brookdale and Hilbert, these are all sort of newer, sort of more modern feeling type of suburbs.
Okay.
And I think in time these will become quite popular, especially as the area develops, because for a lot of people, if they can't get their head around the fact that Armidale is a older, less desirable area, quote unquote. I think Brookdale, these areas like that are slightly more visually appealing will be quite popular for young families. So it's all going to be driven by Lavona occupiers.
All right. I'm very interested to hear your thoughts on anyone that says Armidale's had its run. It's had its time in the sun. It's gone crazy well. It's done. What's your take on that?
Yep. So Armidale has grown a lot, just like a lot of Perth, right? However, I do feel like there's a lot of steam left because a lot of people forget the fact that for 15 years, Perth has done absolutely no growth. In fact, most of Perth went backwards. And the boom has only really been happening for about 3 to 4 years to date in Perth and in Armidale. We started from such an unrealistically low base, right, 3 to 4 years ago. I remember seeing properties in Armidale and also in Mandurah in the twos. These are 3-4 bedroom houses for $250,000, $260,000, $270,000. It was never supposed to be that low, right? So just because a house went from $250,000 to now, let's say 500, it doesn't mean, yes, it has had a lot of growth, but if you look at it from a macro perspective, I still think it's just been playing catch up. And if anything, $500,000 for a house in a major capital city within about 20 k's away is where it should have always been. Do you know what I mean? So I think for the next 5 to 10 years, I still think there's going to be steady growth, considering as well the main driver for growth in Perth and Armidale right now is driven by young families and owner occupiers moving in, not investors trying to make money. It's not about the mining or any sort of, hype element. It's just people that are sick of Sydney, sick of Melbourne, sick of all these, other places that are completely unaffordable where the lifestyle's not that great anyway. They're moving over to Perth and they're driving the boom. So that's why I still think there's a lot of room left.
Because one of the reasons I wanted to put 10-year average growth on the list as well, because you look at some of these like areas that they're not good, but it's like,
Yeah.
this actually just illustrates your point even further.
100%. Because if you look at the 10-year growth rate, you know, in Brisbane, you know, from 2009 to 2019, you would have seen nothing but flatness, right? I speak to a lot of clients that bought properties in 2010 in Brisbane, and they're like, oh, you know, Brisbane doesn't grow. Well, you bought at the wrong time, you know, and you had to wait literally 10 years. And it immediately, almost overnight, I wouldn't say overnight, but maybe within a 3 to 5 year period, a lot of Brisbane has doubled in value already. So, you know, I guess getting in at the right time is important, but, you know, from a macro perspective, like I said, I reckon Perth is still relatively early in the total boom cycle.
And as far as bottom picks are concerned, so we got our top with Butler and also Brookdale. Actually, and just to put you on the spot, if you had to pick one, you could only pick one. Which one are you going for?
Comes down to price. Comes down to the deal.
Okay.
You can't have one grow without the other. But you know what? If I had to pick one, like personal preference, I would probably choose Butler. It's just nicer. You got the beach. Nice. What can I say?
Now, what is the absolute opposite? What are you going, no, I don't care how good the deal is, get it away from me.
My worst picks of your list revolve around one thing: regional/rural, right? Anywhere that's too far out in the middle of nowhere. You know, just to rattle off some suburbs, you've got Beverly, you've got Boddington, Northam, York, Waroona, Gin. Like, for the most part, these are all single industry, one horse towns. You know, they may have seen a little bit of growth, but that's just in line with what the rest of Perth has done, or maybe like offer one-off announcement about some infrastructure or some development project or something happening there.
Yep.
But it's simply not desirable. You're not going to get a massive influx of families and owner-occupiers moving into them, right? And ultimately, that's what drives long-term growth in property prices, but also for prices to stay where they are. So what we see now, especially a lot of the regional areas that got pumped during COVID, they're actually coming back down. You know, a lot of regional Victoria, a lot of areas in Tasmania. So you have to tread very carefully when you look in regional areas. Just a very low amount of owner-occupiers, very low populations as well. So it's basically these towns just simply come and go, you know, over time. So you know, definitely those would be my worst picks. Another maybe two suburbs that you've got on the list are regional suburbs, but they're also right next to the beach.
Okay.
Right, and two suburbs that spring to that sort of spring to mind is Myalup and Preston Beach. Now these areas, I think, are a trap, right? Because while they're by the beach, they're very beautiful. They are super far away from Perth. There's no real economy. There's no real infrastructure. It's just a bunch of holiday homes and mostly retirees living in those areas. You know, so again, the opportunity for a huge amount of buyers pumping up the market is extremely unlikely. And even if it does, I think it will come back down in due course. And really the only times these suburbs really go up a lot is when Perth becomes unaffordable, right? And I think Perth is still a very long way away from that. So if you had the choice between buying within a suburb that's close to Perth versus some of these really far out areas, choose the inner city parts, you know, all day long.
Okay, so basically you're seeing growth that happens in these more regional type areas. Realistically, it's a trickle down effect from when growth in the inner suburbs has got to a point where people go, well, I guess now we'll consider the others.
Yes, absolutely. And it's very dangerous, I want to add, because when the market cools, which eventually it will, maybe 5 or 10 years down the track, these regional areas take a massive dump. You know, time and time again, just look at history, look at what happened in Sydney and Melbourne and Brisbane. They all go back down significantly, and it wouldn't be any different, you know, in Perth or anywhere else, really.
Just the visuals of these areas taking a massive dump. I can't get out of my head.
Well,
all right.
as we have one of the books for one of my kids. Everybody poops,
including regional Perth.
Exactly.
All right, man. We're getting to the point at the end of things then. For our very final question on here, how much longer does the Perth market have in it? Are you thinking months, years? What's your prediction?
Look, in any boom cycle, especially following a 15-year process of no growth, you're always going to see a lot of rapid growth in the initial stages of the boom, right? And that scares a lot of people off. I completely understand why. Looking at a house going from 300K to 600K overnight, a lot of people will make the assumption that the bubble's here. It's all done and dusted, or I'm buying into an area that's already grown so much. But like I said before as well, we started from such a low base that I think at $500,000-$600,000 to buy that particular asset so close to the beach, so close to the city, it's so affordable. It's such an enticing aspect for any young family in Australia, or even coming from overseas, thinking, where am I going to settle down in Australia? Where can I buy for $700,000, $600,000 that particular product? Because the alternative in Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane is a 2-bedroom unit, if you're lucky, right? So I still think it's got a long way to go, but probably more steady growth from here on out. It reminds me a lot of Sydney back in 2014-15, when a lot of Sydney suburbs had already doubled in value from 2010. And I remember seeing on all the magazines when they existed at the time, everyone's going, oh, we're in a bubble now, it's dangerous, and, time to look elsewhere.
Yep.
I think anyone who did follow that advice had a lot of regrets, because if they kept buying in Sydney, they would have seen literally for the past 10 years, doubled to even tripled again. So I'm not saying Perth is the same as Sydney, but the same drivers that led to Sydney growing for so long is the same, which is a lot of people moving and wanting to live in that particular city.
So putting a number to it then, doesn't sound like there's a hard and fast for you, but you're definitely looking in the years.
You're trying to trap me, Todd.
I just know there's someone that's about to jump into the comment section going, he didn't really answer the question. So like,
if I say a number, someone's going to put me up on it like, oh, Simon, you said 8 years, but it actually was 9 years.
What's a variation, a top and bottom? What do you reckon the smallest amount roughly would be?
3-4 years. I think for the next 5, I reckon for the next 5 to 10 years, we'll see steady growth. Right.
5 to 10.
There'll be periods of stagnant, activity, depending on what's happening around the world as well. There might be even periods where it might go down a little bit, but I think the overall sort of trajectory is definitely upwards.
Yep.
I think it's normal to expect an area after it's doubled in value in 3 to 4 years to take a bit of a breather, but I think it's going to be temporary.
Okay, but depending on what happens around the world, if we need to get into that Cooper Pedy bunker or not.
Don't buy in Cooper Pedy. That wasn't advice.
Simon Loo from Housefinder, thank you so much for jumping on the show, mate. Always appreciate your thoughts.
Yeah, no worries.
It's not a huge surprise there that Simon didn't pick regional Perth. It's not one area. It's just like anything regional, no go for that guy. I mean, he's never really been a regional investor. One of the things that I'm really fascinated or going to be fascinated about with this episode is your thoughts in the comments section. If you agree, disagree, drop it below. I really want this episode to be conversational. If you're listening on iTunes or Spotify, makes it a little bit tricky. If you're on YouTube right now, literally scroll down. Tell us what you think. Because having our first expert on the panel say there's potentially 5 to 10 years left of steady growth in the market. I don't know about you, but that fills me with a bit more confidence. As much as no one's got a crystal ball of the exacts that are going to happen, when someone with a $20+ million portfolio shares their thoughts and speaks on that level, I listen closely. But next up on the panel, let's chat with Dawn Fouhy. Dawn Fouhy, having built a multi-million-dollar portfolio and now absolutely killing it in the buyer's agency space. Dawn Fouhy, how you going?
Excellent, Todd. How are you?
Very good. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. And I know as someone that's heavily invested in Perth, been buying in Perth a bit, there's going to be a few people that are really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on this one. But is there anything you want to set the stage with before we get into your top pick to start things off?
This list was tough. It is tough buying conditions in Perth at the moment, and we will unpack that. It is certainly the Wild West, but definitely there's some areas that we need to proceed with caution.
The Wild West probably is the perfect way to describe this as well. I think there'd be a few people rocking up to opens with lassos these days, whatever it takes.
Yeah, but I think that's where some people are going wrong. So I hear a lot of narrative around, as long as I've gotten into Perth, you're arriving well into a party that's been going for a few years.
Yeah. Okay. So you reckon it's a little bit of FOMO there?
Oh, yeah. In certain suburbs, there still is excellent buying in some suburbs, but you have to be super careful in one of the suburbs that I'm going to talk about is on the list.
Okay. Well, before we get into that one, on the list, what is your top pick for Perth under 550?
My top pick is Middle Swan. It is not heading for a swan song yet. Uh, it is, yeah, the data's looking unreal on it. Really good spot.
Okay. And in what terms, when you said the data's looking unreal, what about it?
So for me, firstly, what's really driving the Perth market is supply and demand. So with Middle Swan, the days on market are 7. It's actually, in actuality, a lot lower than that. You're talking about an area that has grown less than 50% over 3 years. So I think while a lot of people were going for, you know, suburbs they saw in the media or suburbs they saw the people talking about, it was slowly doing its run. It didn't have the monumental spurts that other places had. So you're getting really good buying there as far as how much it's grown over the last 3 years.
What makes you think it's been forgotten? Like, because it sounds like that's almost what's happened.
It definitely has been forgotten. So it's kind of where it's sandwiched is near Midvale. So I think a lot of focus was around that Midvale area, or even people were going out further towards Ellenbrook. And historically, Middle Swan has got the older homes, like the early 90s, late 80s, more of your character homes that may not be appealing to your broad level of investor that can't see the value that you can add to those properties out there.
Okay, so you're looking at Middle Swan through the lens of it's still got room to grow, where there's other areas that may have done really, really well. It's like, how much further can they go? Whereas this one, 50% in the last 3 years, there's potentially a lot more juice left in the tank.
Correct. And it's 70% owner occupiers as well. So
Wow.
hasn't been on investors' radars. So what scares me is when I see areas with 50% of investors, because every market will go through a correction and a downturn. I never want to position myself in a market with more than 40% renters. Isn't a good idea. You don't want to expose yourself to that level.
70% owner occ, that really is a high owner occ area.
And the average weekly income is pretty good. So around $1,400 a week. So anyone who gets a mortgage of 550K, their weekly repayments, you know, at the interest rates now might be somewhere around $800 a week. So what I really look at is extrapolating out that data, seeing what the mortgage ceiling, the pain point would be for the population in that area as to how much it can grow. So everywhere, every suburb has an affordability cap, and you really need to be smart in thinking about how much you're investing in a certain area.
Okay, so Middle Swan, top pick. Hasn't done much growing over the past 3 years. It's got a really healthy owner occupancy rate. Days on market are 7, which if you're new to property investing, you might think, oh, maybe that's normal. That's not normal. That's insane. But you're saying it's potentially even lower than 7 anyway, that there's even a bit of lag there. So there's a fair bit of pressure coming to it, but not a lot of growth that's happened. That's your top pick for the list. What's your worst pick for the list? Which one are you staying away from?
Armadale.
Armadale. Okay.
Yeah.
You're just trying to rustle some feathers?
No, so I'm trying to help people from just to not follow the crowd. So investors generally chase yield and chase other investors. So everybody wants validation and reassurance. Oh, this area must be good because so and so invested there. Yeah, like 2 years ago. So if you were buying an Armadale 2, 3 years ago, you were buying a house, you know, for high 200s, mid 200s. Nobody wanted to buy there. So this is an area over the last 3 years that has grown 87%. You have missed 87% of that growth. When I looked at the listings, there's 50 properties for rent at the moment. The vacancy rate is near 2%. It's shocking really what has happened in the area. 56% renters.
Yeah, wow. You said 2% vacancy rate in this market.
Hipping to 2% vacancy rate, correct, because of the level of stock that is there. Middle Swan, there is 3 properties for rent.
So you reckon it's not that Armadale is necessarily a bad pick. You're looking at it going, it was the good pick 2 years ago.
Correct. And this is the same rhetoric around as long as I'm in the market, it's not going to work out like that, because affordability wise, the average weekly wage in the area is $1,000. There will be a lot of mortgage stress once you get to that 700K cap out of a mortgage. I get why perhaps the unsophisticated investor is buying there. It's appealing to be able to buy sub 600. You're still getting 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, big block of land, but you have to remember that you've missed 86% of that growth. It's a very poor choice for me at this point in the cycle in Perth.
Okay, and for anyone that's not too familiar with Perth, can you describe the kind of like a comparison area for Armidale? Is that like a Christie Downs of South Australia, a Frankston of Victoria?
Kind of like your Hackham. It might be like a Dallas in Victoria. So Armidale is, amongst locals, it's a less desirable area. In saying that, because of affordability, it's had probably the strongest price growth in all of the suburbs thus far.
But you reckon that that growth is potentially coming to an end, whilst there's other spots where maybe there's a bit more left?
I think that it's more so the opportunity cost of you leveraging into somewhere that has already had substantial growth, and you're also exposing yourself when the market does correct, because it will. When supply meets the demand, you're exposing yourself to an area that is leveraged with renters. Owner-occupiers drive growth, not renters.
Gotcha.
You have a property that's going to sit there being vacant, you're dropping rents. So please be careful where you're investing in Perth. Not all suburbs are the same at this point in the cycle.
Brilliant. Dawn, I love it. So as far as Perth as a whole right now, the $64 million question everyone wants an answer to, how much longer do you think Perth's run has?
I think that it will surprise a lot of people. So we already know that Brisbane and Adelaide's median is chasing the million. It's very close. I think Perth's median will hit $1 million start of 2026. It has the highest wages, weekly wages in Australia. I think that because there's no new supply coming in, we've got migration at record levels. I think that the Perth market has another good 3 years in certain suburbs, in suburbs where owner occupiers are going to drive that growth, not the investor suburbs.
Okay, so 3 years, but big caveat there, not all of Perth.
Not all of Perth.
Gotcha. Okay. This is brilliant. Dawn, is there anything that you're wanting to leave our listeners with today? Any final words of wisdom on either the list or investing in the Perth market in general?
Don't follow the crowd. So there's a suburb there maybe you've never heard of before, Middle Swan, that has excellent data. And yeah, just try and do your own research, block out all the noise. Perth is not just mining. It has a very vibrant economy, and it will continue to grow despite people's opinions. And opinions are not facts. So remember that.
Love it. Dawn Fouhy from Future Proof Property Advisory. Thank you so much for jumping on the show.
Thanks, Todd.
Worst pick, Armidale. Interested to hear what you guys think about that. But this one, I mean, it makes sense, I guess, where she's coming from. It's not necessarily that it's the worst place to invest, but Dawn's really approaching this from the perspective of, like she said, 2 years ago, amazing. But are you hopping on that train a little bit too late? I mean, I think the general consensus for a lot of people that I'm speaking to is they feel like they'd kind of missed the boat with Perth. Like already now just 2 experts deep, it's kind of feeling like probably not. I mean, Dawn giving this, what was it, around 3 years? 3 or so years left in the tank with Perth. And the thing that's already making sense so far as like a bit of a common theme is the markets don't tend to just go and then just absolutely fall off a cliff. I mean, if that happens, we've got a whole list of other problems. But generally, you look back through history and do this for yourself. You can actually see it through all the charts. Most of the time, the market, once it comes off the boil, it'll start slowing down, and then maybe it'll correct a little bit. Okay, and that's normally when the media jumps on it and starts talking like, oh, the market's come back 5%, and they go, oh, crash, boom, boom. No, not boom, it's the opposite. Yeah, crash. Crash, everything's falling apart, it's so terrible. When really, it's just a part of the cycle and how it happens. So even if you were to get into Perth now, and if you've been sitting on the sidelines, so far we've got one expert basically saying 5 to 10 years potentially of steady growth. Not the booms that we've been having, but still something solid. Got another still saying that there's a few years left potentially in the tank. But the big thing that I'm picking up from Dawn is don't follow the herd from a few years ago. Start marching to the beat of your own drum now. Start looking for the areas that maybe haven't done as well, that have got more of that potential to do well moving forward. Again, interested to hear what you guys think. But right now, let's jump into the chat with our next expert, property manager and property investor, Jarrad Mahon. Jarrad Mahon, a property investor and property manager with a rare boots on the ground perspective of the Perth property market. Jarrad Mahon, back again. How are you, man?
Yeah, really good, Todd.
I'm very eager to hear your thoughts on this list, Jarrad, because we've got a wide range of professionals, all that are sort of coming at this from different angles. But you're one of the few, that, or actually the only we've got on this panel that are proper boots on the ground in Perth. Like you're in property management, you're in sales, you're in buyers agencies, you're wearing all of these hats, but you're still standing at the front door these days. Is that correct?
Yeah. So very intimate with what's going on here. We manage properties across 200 plus suburbs. We've got 1,000 odd managements, and we buy for clients and sell for clients. So very intimate with what's happening.
Absolutely, mate. So if we could kick this off with your top pick on the list, I don't think I'm going to be the only one that's eager to hear what that is for you.
Well, I'm a little bit torn about giving you this one, Todd, because I'm actually actively looking here to buy an investment property for my own portfolio for my parents-in-law to live in and sort of rent back from us. So
okay, so this really is
the
the
rental market here is very tough, and they can't find a rental to move to. So we're going to find them one to buy and live in. So
good.
The suburb is Midland. And it's one of our satellite cities northeast of the Perth. It's relatively close to Perth compared to a lot of others at just 16 kilometres. And the reason I've gone for here is that it's been mostly overlooked by investors over the last 2 to 3 years in favour of areas like the Rockinghams and the Armadales and the Quinanas that have all had much bigger surges.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so when you say like 16 Ks, but you just refer to it as a satellite city. Whenever I talk about a satellite city, I'm thinking something that's like 30, 40 Ks away.
No. So we have our sort of Armadale is another satellite city. We've got Joondalup in the north. We've got Woonaroo, and down in Rockingham, we've got Mandurah. And this is really the northeast of Perth, if you picture going up in that direction, and very close to Perth. So.
Okay. And so you're saying that this has been an area that's been largely overlooked by investors, just hadn't had the same kind of activity.
And when we look at its 10-year average annual growth rate, that's really reflective in that. It's only had 0.08% average growth over the last 10 years, and many other areas are approaching 3 to 4% average growth over that same time period. So it's reflective in how undervalued it is at the moment.
So as much as a lot of Perth's seen a lot of growth, and we're seeing this as a really common flavour at the moment, and in a lot of cases, it's not actually really growth, it's recovery. Okay.
And it's really sort of only just getting back to the prices that it was at in 2014, 15, if you will.
Okay. But you're seeing that a lot more here because it's a better area as far as location's concerned. It's been overlooked, hasn't had as much growth. What's the yield like? Is it actually easier to hold as an investment?
On the rental side, it's got one of the strongest yields of your obvious suburbs list at 5.93% yield. Vacancy rate is very tight at 0.71%. When we look to its longer term growth and how it's performed historically, over 20 and 30 years, it's had pretty reasonable growth rates at 4.46% and 4.73%. And keep in mind that it hasn't had its most recent growth cycle to be included in that 20 or 30 years. So by the time it goes around again, that'll be sitting, a fair bit higher.
And what are you seeing on the ground there? Is this something that you've got a few rentals in, like in the portfolio for the company, or is it something you're buying in now?
Well, actively, I'm looking to buy in and around that area, and I'm just seeing how undervalued it is. Armadale, Rockingham, these other areas have shot up by so much. When you look at what you can get in Midland compared to the other areas, it's very stark how better value buying there is there.
And you're talking about condition of property, like block size. What's better about it?
I'm really looking at it from a purely numbers point of view, but it does also have a lot of that infrastructure in that town centre that holds up jobs, that holds up desirability. And its relative distance to Perth at 16 Ks. You've got the airport very close by, you've got the city close by, and you've also got the hills quite close by and the Swan Valley is on its back doorstep as well. So
okay, all right. So Midland is your top pick.
Now there's a couple of negatives. I don't know if you want me to also.
Oh yeah, no,
this.
Go for it. Go.
So it is lower socioeconomic, but you're going to get that with this type of price point. There's going to be some trade-offs, and I want to tell people about those trade-offs. So it does have a relatively high crime score because of that lower socioeconomic, demographic, and it's also got a relatively high percentage of renters at 65%. So it's going to be one of the higher percentage of renters on your overall suburbs list. And those are the trade-offs that you're looking at. But I think overall, with it being so undervalued, its relative distance to Perth and its strong rentability side, you're going to see some real good catch-up growth there in the shorter term, and it's been a reasonable performer over the longer term.
Okay, so a higher portion of renters, and it's got a higher crime score. Looking at that then, what do you say, and again, more of a boots on the ground approach, as far as the gentrification wheel, do you feel that that's really turning there, or is that like, no, it's probably looking like it's going to stay this way?
I think it's going to stay because I looked at the relative SAD scores and that it's stayed the same over the last 2 census periods. So there's nothing to make me believe that it's trending in the positive direction. So it's trending sideways. I think you if you know what you get and and its negatives, I think you could still take, it'd be a good overall purchase even with those things in mind.
Makes sense. Now, what's our contrast of the absolute opposite? What is your worst pick on the list?
So this was a little harder because there's probably 2 or 3 suburbs that I could have chosen, but what I chose was Preston Beach, and it's reflective of some of the other suburbs I was weighing up whether to choose as well. And I used to holiday here when I was a kid. Lovely beaches, and I hear it's got a great spot for fishing. So, if you come over, I've got a boat, and we could go down there and probably have a fabulous weekender.
But okay, go squidding.
I'm not choosing it for the weekender. I'm choosing it for not to invest.
And so it's a beautiful place by the sounds of things, but investment bad because why are you looking at this as a negative?
Well, it's 103 kilometres south of Perth between Mandurah and Bunbury. So it's a little bit sort of in limbo between the two.
Too regional?
And so for me, when I look at its historical growth rate over the last 20 years, it's actually had one of the lowest of all your suburbs at 3.11%. And what it shows for me that it's hitting the top of its value is that over the last 10 years, it's done an average of 2.8%. So it's approaching that 3.11 that it's had over the 20 years. So I think it's hitting towards its top. And what I didn't mention for why I chose Midland as well is I use short-term prediction tools as well. And I don't know if you've heard of HTAG. So HTAG predicted Midland to be the strongest on your list as well, with a 17% growth rate over the next year. And I contrast that with Preston Beach, that was predicted to have an 8% gain. So still quite reasonable. I mean, at the moment, you can probably throw a dart at the board in Perth and you're going to get, 6% plus on anything. But I'm not just buying for the shorter term. My recommendations are always about the longer term as well. And this place, Preston Beach, it's the kind of place that when the market goes south and goes cold, it can be very hard to sell a property and rent a property there. And the reason for that really is that it doesn't have the local surrounding jobs and infrastructure that really keeps drawing the population growth to it. So it has lots of land supply around it, but not the demand to exceed that supply. And that's why, for me, longer term, I wouldn't take the risk.
Okay, so it might look attractive as far as a low entry price, a decent yield on it, but realistically, that's probably propped up right now just because of the general Perth heat. But then as soon as that's taken out, you go back to a more stable market, you think this is going to be one of the areas that really feels it.
And it does have if all of those reasons aren't enough for you, it does have one of the lowest rental yields of all the suburbs too, at just 3.66%. So usually when you're going a bit more regional, you'd want to be compensated for that risk in your rental yield. And I'm just not seeing that reward for risk, if you will.
3.6. I got that wrong then. I read that wrong. I thought that was 6%. Never mind. I've confused that with a different area. Okay, so yeah, you definitely want a better yield.
I was right in that anyway. So even if it was 6%, for me, that wouldn't be enough reward for the risk.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about with Preston Beach before we move on to the final question?
No, I think I've covered it all in that.
Mate, then I've got to ask the $64 million question everyone wants to hear an answer to. From your boots on the ground professional experience, Jarrad, how much more does the Perth market have in it?
Look, I'm expecting 2 to 3 years, and I have noticed lots of other commentators, saying already that we've done our dash and that, stay out of Perth. But all the underlying fundamentals for me are still so strong. I did a study recently, and we're one of the most affordable capital cities by median house price relative to income. So there's a lot more affordability for people to pay higher rents and higher house prices still. And we've got one of the highest population growth rates still, other than Queensland, other than Brisbane. So where migrants are being attracted by that affordability and by that strong economy and all the jobs that we've got, which is still looking good for the foreseeable. And most importantly, our state government isn't messing with land tax and revenue raising, and they're not messing with our Residential Tenancies Act. They're keeping it very vanilla. So that, you look at what's happening in Victoria and, what the Queensland government tried to do with their land tax, all of that in the other states is putting investors off. So for investors, our rental yields are still very attractive and our vacancy rates are still very, very low. So bit of a perfect storm, I think.
We recently did an episode with Mike Mortlock, Perth versus Melbourne. And that was one of the big takeaways from it, was that Melbourne at the moment, time of recording, is very much using the stick, not the carrot. Whereas Perth is using a little bit of the carrot, but it's more so just the absence of the stick. There's very little to actually turn investors off. And I hear what you're saying. So you're looking at this going, there's still a lot of affordability. There's still pretty low purchase prices to get into the market. There's still a lot of people actually moving to Perth. It's got great population growth. And like we just discussed before, some of these 10-year averages, it's recovery still. It's not even in that real growth phase. So you're predicting another 2 to 3 years potentially.
Yeah. Well, when we go deeper on that, the lower end has had, the most growth of all of our price points.
Yep.
And I'm now seeing it spread to villas and units and start to get to the more middle priced houses growing strongest at between 700 and 1.2.
Okay.
So the most sort of shorter term upside is going to be in that 700 to 1.2. There's still upside selectively in under 700K, like a Midland and like these areas that are more relatively undervalued, but you need to be a bit more careful now. And that's why, having someone on the ground such as us, that's buyer's agent, property manager, we can really look at, the data and interpret it. So, anyone over East can interpret data, but the local knowledge also plays a big part in that. So then I think our cycle will finish in the upper end suburbs at the 1.2 million plus. And when I look at what's actually happened to the median house price in Perth, over the last 30 years, it did an average of 5.65%. And over the last 10 years, it's only done 1.6% still. So
yeah, okay,
5.6% versus 1.6. We've got a lot more sort of upside on the average growth and where it can get to.
Love it. Jarrad Mahon from Investors Edge, thank you so much for jumping on the show, mate. Really appreciate your thoughts and your boots on the ground opinion.
I'll tune into the others and see what they had to say, see how I compared. But thanks, mate.
I hope to see you again soon.
Cheers.
One of the reasons I really wanted Jarrad on this panel is because there's a few, like being a property investor, property manager, And he also is in the sales and BA space. But from what I understand, this guy really has his finger on the pulse. All the conversations I've had with Jarrad, he really has his finger on the pulse in a very like boots on the ground kind of way. And this is where it's amazing to look at the data, and we're never going to stop doing that. But to actually talk to people that are like at the coalface, it changes things. It's like you're removing any kind of lag. Whilst that's great, the thing that I actually really liked about what Jarrad said was he's picking an area with a median house price of like, I think it was like 400 and something. Let me actually just double check again. Yeah, $438,750. If you haven't downloaded the full list yet, again, it links in the show notes. $438,750. And I can really see what he's saying here. And this kind of reflects on what Dawn's saying as well, as like the areas that maybe haven't done as well. Like looking at this, like here, 10-year average annual growth, 0.08%. Like it's like, it's done okay. Again, you look back over the past few years, but then when you really step back and you look at that bigger picture, you're like, wait a second, I can see why there's room to move here still. Still super affordable, like 16 Ks from the city. We're talking pretty close proximity. Inventory levels are tight. Again, like this is all kind of making sense. But the big thing, again, $438,000, like it's the median right now. Now, if you're watching this in 6 months' time, and actually this will be really interesting, and I'll probably get some crap in the comment section for this, but I bet you the median house price is not 438,000 anymore. I can see this really being a case of who's actually ready to jump into the market with this, because you don't just want to randomly pick something on a list, okay? And that's absolutely not what this is about. This is about filtering out a whole lot of the fluff, a whole lot of the, like I get people calling me sometimes and telling me that they've bought in places I just think are horrible. It's too late. They've already bought. Jumping on a call and like talking to one of these experts, leveraging their decades of experience in some cases, or if you want to do it yourself, making sure that you're really jumping into this research, leaning on the opinions that are from this episode, but not just blindly following them. But anyway, circling back, I'm looking at this and thinking, still being able to pick something up in the fours almost feels like a joke. 16 Ks from a capital city, like name any other place, like name any other capital city in the country that you can do that. But again, interested to hear what you guys think in the comments below. But right now, let's jump into the chat and see the opinions of a self-made young man from a property investing and mortgage broking perspective. We're chatting with Bill Childs. Bill Childs, self-made 20-something millionaire. This guy's accomplished a lot at a young age and is approaching Perth from an investor and mortgage broker's perspective. Bill Childs, been too long, man. How you going?
Good, thanks, Todd. How are you?
Yeah, really good, mate. Looking forward to getting your take on this one, because I know that you've enjoyed personally in your own portfolio a bit of uplift from the Perth property market. You're writing a lot of loans at the moment and seeing a lot of what people are looking for. So from a bit of a two-prong, both investor and professionally, very interested to see your take on the list. But is there anything you wanted to kind of set the stage with before we get into your top pick and bottom pick?
Mate, I'd like to just probably say that there's a lot of areas on the list. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of different price points and also areas that are further ahead in their growth than other areas. So there's areas like Armidale, which we were just talking about off air, that's done 135% in 5 years. So I look at markets like that and I think, well, you know, you've sort of missed the boat. There might be a bit more growth there, but I'd prefer to be buying in a market that's done less growth recently, but still has good long-term fundamentals for strong price growth.
Okay, so one of your key factors that you're looking at is really what are the suburbs that have missed that huge boom so far, that have done well but not really well?
Yeah, exactly. Like I went to Perth, I bought in Perth for the first time in 2021, mm-hmm. and for myself, and that was at that time the market had done very poorly. It had gone, you know, flat for years and backwards before that, but you just got to look at it and look at the fundamentals and say, well, this market's going to perform at some time. I didn't know it would happen in a year's time or 6 months' time and go as crazy as it did. But you want to look at markets that have underperformed, if anything, recently, but have that good long-term performance rather than one that's just doubled in 3 or 5 years.
Okay, well, with that in mind, what's your top pick on the list?
The top pick I had for growth was the suburb of Westminster.
Westminster. Okay. And why Westminster?
So Westminster's only 10 Ks to the CBD. And I actually went to Westminster back in 2022, early 2022. And one of the main things, we can look at all the data, which the data is pretty good. You got inventory that's only 0.5 months. So houses are selling
Basically non-existent.
Yeah,
Yep.
there's nothing.
Yeah.
Days on market is 8, which is obviously also very good. We've got a 10-year average growth rate of just 1.6%, which if you look at the list of suburbs we had, that figure doesn't really mean much because we had that big dip in Perth from 2014 to 2015 starting then, and it went down until about 2019, 2020. So those figures aren't really that relevant. But the vacancy rate is 0.55%, which is pretty consistent across the whole Perth market and a lot of the country at the moment. So when we look at Westminster, we've got a median house price on the list of $530,000. But I went and compared this with RP data figures, which are a little bit different to the ones we've got on the list, because I wanted to compare it to the bordering suburbs, which are just next door. And when I went to this suburb back in 2022, driving through the suburbs, a lot of the time I didn't know when I was crossing from suburb to suburb because it all looks very similar. You know, at times you'll be in a suburb that might be worth $1 million, and then you'll drive into a suburb that's worth 700,000, and you can tell.
Yeah. You can clearly see there's a shift in demographic. But so you didn't get this feeling here at all?
Not a lot, no. And obviously a local, they'll know a lot more than me. But driving around the area, they looked very similar. The difference is in the RP data figures, Westminster median price is $595,000. Balcatta next door is $795,000. So that's $200,000 on top of the median price. And Dianella is at $906,000. So these are big variances in suburbs that are just next door to each other for no apparent reason. Historically, Westminster had a bad name. But again, driving through there nowadays, it's pretty similar to the others.
And so there was no like huge view or coastal or something that you were looking at going, oh, okay, this makes sense. It was just, it really did all blend together pretty well.
It did. Yeah, it did. And there was, you know, if you go in Dianella, there's more expensive houses than what you'll find in Westminster. But overall, if we're looking at an average, you know, $200,000 to $300,000 difference in median price, I think there's room for suburbs like that to catch up, especially considering that over the last 5 years, Westminster's only done 67%, which in a normal market is great. But again, comparing it to suburbs like, Armidale or Gosnells or something like that, they've done 120, 130%.
Man, this is awesome. Okay, so you're looking at Westminster going, Westminster, if I can say it right, it's got a lot of juice left in the tank potentially because it hasn't grown the way a lot of others have grown around it. It's got crazy low inventory levels. Days on market are laughably low, as are a lot of suburbs in Perth right now. But the kicker for you is surrounding suburbs have really got pretty good names, much higher median house prices. Whichever data set we go with, they're going to be significantly higher and to the tune of $200,000 by the sounds of what you're saying. They might be slightly bigger houses or maybe nicer houses, but it's still in that pocket that's set for growth for several reasons. So I'm seeing why Westminster's the pick, man. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about on your top pick before we get into your worst pick?
Well, mate, it's also 10Ks to the CBD of Perth. So it's very much in the inner ring. Yeah. So if you're looking at sort of that, you know, you'd call it blue chip, middle or inner ring markets of a capital city, if you can buy within 10Ks of a major CBD for, you know, under $600,000, I think you're doing pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
You're also only in Westminster. Also, another thing, you're only about 10 or 12 minutes to Scarborough Beach, which is one of the best beaches in Perth.
You're right. So you're getting close to the city and close to the water if you want.
Yeah, that's it.
Nice, man. And did you say the yields as well? Are the yields still looking pretty healthy? Or
the yield's 5.4%. So not too bad at all, really. A lot of investors are chasing, you know, 6-7% or whatever. But in the grand scheme of things, again, 10Ks to the CBD of a capital city, you're probably not going to beat that.
No, not at all, man. Now, what's the absolute contrast? Which one would you be staying away from?
Mate, the absolute contrast is Boddington.
Boddington.
Yes, Boddington is a mining town. So as we know, and a lot of people listening to the show will know, historically mining towns can do very, very well. But obviously, historically, they can do very, very bad on the other side of that boom. So Boddington is 111 Ks from the CBD of Perth, which is a long way inland. It's east of Perth, so there's
a big
not a
walk.
lot out there. It's a big walk, mate. You might walk it, seeing as though you went from Melbourne to Adelaide or whatever, but yeah, most people wouldn't.
No.
In Boddington, we've got a median price of just $302,000, so it's very cheap.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got a rental yield of 8.42%, which is massive. I often get sent properties in mining towns, which I'm sure you've been sent as well, by investors that are just starting out, and they type in, you know, wherever's got the highest yield, and then they go and look there. And someone would go, why would I buy in Westminster with a 5.4% yield for, you know, 600 grand when I can buy in Boddington for 300 grand with an 8.4% yield? It's massive. So the downside to that, which is going to be the growth situation. In 2011, for example, Boddington peaked, which would have been at the height of the mining boom, the last mining boom, because this is predominantly a mining town. There's only about 1,800 people in this town. So it's basically all miners, FIFO workers, stuff like that, from what I can see. So in 2011, the median price was $380,000 in Boddington, which is higher than it is now, 12 years, 13 years later. However, by 2017, do you know what happened, Todd? You can probably guess.
Yeah, it went down.
Mate,
I should laugh about this. There's probably a few poor people in Boddington that have purchased, and they're like, you bastards laughing at my misery.
Oh, mate, I don't doubt that at all. Yeah. So Boddington, 2011, $380,000 median price. By 2017, 6 years later, the median price was $180,000.
Oh my God.
So
that's pain.
If you've bought properties in that market and you've bought, you know, even with a safe LVR, 80%, you're negative equity by a lot. And also the issue is when the prices drop that much, the rents also plummet. So your rent can go from, you know, your 8% yield of $600 a week on your 400K purchase or whatever. Next thing, you've got a property that's worth 180 and it's renting for $200 a week. It's just shocking. And it happens over and over again in these mining towns. If you don't get in at the absolute bottom and sell at the absolute peak, they can be very dangerous. So that is a drop of 52% in the median house price, which is consistent with a lot of these mining towns and why I stay away from them at all costs.
And I know I'm going to get grilled for even putting suburbs like this on the list. This is literally why we chose to do it, though, because if you're an experienced investor, you're probably already looking at some of these areas going, of course they're going to be on the bottom pick. But if you're a little bit newer at this, exactly like Bill's just said, you're looking at it going, 8% yield, that's pretty good. I need to chase a cash flow play. 300 grand, that's not bad. Yeah, okay, I can get into this. It's about looking behind these kinds of areas to go, what are the extra risks that you're potentially holding that you might not even be aware of? And Bill has just highlighted this perfectly. 380,000 in 2011 to, what'd you say, 180?
380 to 180 in the space of 6 years.
Yeah. Okay. So this is absolutely deserving the worst pick on the list, mate.
It is rough. And yeah, but the thing is, if you just look at data, a lot of people in property now, I hear data, this, data, you know? You got to look at more than just data, because the data is not overly bad on this suburb if you just look at data. I see a lot of, property professionals and whatnot selling courses on how to analyze markets and the data and stuff like that, and data. But if you're just looking at the data and not taking into account stuff like the proximity to the CBD, the past performance, and the actual fundamentals of a real estate market, besides the, median price, the median rent, the vacancy rate and stuff like that, this is where you can get it wrong. Because if we look at the data for this suburb, the inventory is only 1.3 months. That's good. That's low.
Really low inventory. Yeah.
That's very low. Yes. The vacancy rate is 0%. There's no vacancies there because they're all filled with miners right now. The mines are booming. Yeah.
Yep.
The population that earns over $3,000 a week at a household level, median household income, is 23%, which is also massive. That's bigger than most suburbs in Perth.
That's good, yeah.
So you could easily look at this. The percentage of renters is 37%, which is not bad at all.
Not huge.
No. You could easily look at these stats and get it wrong and buy somewhere like this because of the high yields, especially when you've seen it growing. That's another thing. When people look at a market and they go, this market's done 8% a year for the last 5-6 years. It would have done more. It would have done 10, 12% a year for the last 4 or 5 years, year on year. And they think that that's going to keep going, but that's usually the opposite of how it works.
And you're highlighting such a good point, man, because like data obviously plays a very crucial role in property investing, but it's not the only part of it. It's like I don't know why I always go to like a baking analogy, and I don't bake, so I might be about to stuff this up. But like if you're about to bake like an apple pie and you're just focused on just the apples, you're just going to end up with applesauce. It's like there's more ingredients that come into it, and it's the same kind of thing. Like the data has to measure up, but it's not the only thing you should be looking at. And if it is, you might just end up with applesauce.
That's right. Yeah. You need the data and you need the actual fundamentals of the area. You need to get on the ground or have someone on the ground that's there to check everything out for you.
100%, man. And now rolling into the last question, how much heat do you reckon is left in the Perth property market? We talking months, we talking years? What is your expert opinion?
Even the suburbs in Perth that I said that I would probably prefer not to buy in right now because of the performance they've had over the last 5 years. For example, again, our friend Armadale. For the record, I would have bought in Armadale 3-4 years ago. I looked there, I ended up buying down in Rockingham, but Armadale was on the radar. That was when the prices were $230,000 for a house. They're now $530,000, and it's done 135% in 5 years. But saying that, it's also done 43% in the last year. So it's very hard to see it going from doing 43% in the last year to doing 0% in the next year, or going negative in the next year. I don't think that will happen. But markets like that, I think, would be close, or a lot closer to topping out over the next, say, year and a half, 2 years than some other markets around the country.
Okay. And so when you say markets like that, you're referring to more Armadale that's maybe really had a bigger slice of this pie so far, or are you referring to Perth as a whole?
Well, there's a lot of Perth that's done over 100%. If you look Armadale, Gosnells, all of that area, and then if you look down the coast, Rockingham, Warnbro, Waikiki, Mandurah even now, a lot of those suburbs have done 90 to 130%. So that's why I sort of looked at the suburbs like Westminster that's got the good fundamentals for growth long-term, being close to CBD, surrounded by areas that are more expensive. So it's going to have appeal for owner-occupiers that are pushed out of those more expensive areas in the future. You can get to the beach from there. You can get to the city from there. It's still relatively affordable in terms of a capital city thing, especially being so close to the CBD of a capital city. We do have people in that suburb that are earning decent incomes. We've got low vacancy rates and all of the stuff you want to see in a market that's going to do well long-term, but it hasn't had that 120% in the last 5 years. So I look at that and I go, okay, markets like that are probably a bit better opportunity going forward. Obviously, you would have been better off picking Gosnells, Armadale, or Rockingham 3 years ago. You would have done way better in the cheaper markets. But now that they've done so much and they've really caught up to some of the more expensive areas that are determined to be better areas by the locals in Perth, I don't think they make as much sense as an investment going forward.
Making a lot of sense, man. All right, so we're talking top pick, Westminster, bottom pick, Boddington. And as far as how much longer is left in the Perth market, it sounds like you're talking a few years, but it's sounding like you got to be very selective of the areas that you're choosing moving forward.
Yeah, I can't see it going from growing as much as it has to stopping or going backwards immediately in the next 6 months or a year. But I think that in the next few years, it will slow down. And if I was looking for a market that was going to produce another 100% growth cycle from here on out, I don't think that's going to be markets in Perth like Armadale that's gone from $200,000 to $530,000. I don't think in 5 years' time it's going to be 1.06 mil.
Yeah, gotcha.
Hard to believe.
Bill Childs from Limitless Lending Group. Thank you so much for jumping on the show, mate. It's always a pleasure.
No worries, Todd. Thanks for having me.
Boddington. This is a perfect example of how sometimes the data can look amazing, but then when you peel back a little bit further and you start to really look at the crux of it all, It's like, wait a second, maybe this isn't what I thought it was. Because like we just discussed with Bill, like on the surface level, cool, sounds pretty good. Low inventory, super affordable. Like there's a few data points kind of going, oh yeah, okay, I can see how this is going well. But then when you learn about the size of it and how easily it's skewed, how it doesn't really take the smallest amount of demand to shift that demand indicator to looking like it's going off the Richter scale. Although I don't think we use Richter for measuring in property investment, but you know what I mean? It's like the pressure maybe isn't what you think it is. And like I'm sure I've said in this episode, that the purpose of this isn't just to say, hey, here are really the cool spots. It's also about highlighting some of the danger zones, because being protected from a bad choice is sometimes even better than making a good choice, because a bad choice can put you out of the game for a long time. And in some cases, if it's real bad, can put you out for good. Absolutely want to avoid stuff like that. And so the lure of getting into the market for 300 and something thousand, it's pretty cool. Maybe I could buy 2 instead of 1. But I feel like that kind of thinking, if you don't dive in deeper, and again, we're scratching the surface on this, but if you don't dive in deeper, then what you're looking at is the price, not the real cost. Because the cost of holding in an area that maybe you've got higher vacancy when things do eventually come off the boil, your holding costs are big. When you're struggling to get trades in, because the town's pretty small and maybe there's only a few plumbers in there, it's really difficult. People don't want to travel there. Your property managers are terrible because they don't really care. I have literally been through that just recently on one of our properties. And then the whole lack of capital growth. I say, and then the whole, like, it's not important. It's probably one of the most important parts of it. When the pressure's off, it's kind of like, what's that whole, like when the tide comes out, we can see who's been swimming naked. And there's going to be a few areas on this list. Revisit this episode in a few years' time that you'll be able to look at and be like, oh, I can see now. The benefit of hindsight, it's always a beautiful thing. But Westminster, looking at it just sounds posh, doesn't it? When I think Westminster, I immediately think like Westminster Abbey. But if you're wanting to pull up a little bit more on the actual whole area itself, what was it, 530 for a median house price? And we're talking pretty close to the city as well, like 10 Ks away. Still got a decent rental yield and a pretty reasonable owner-occ rate. Was it 47% renters? It's not amazing and it's not terrible. But so far from our panel, we've had Simon Loo picking Butler. Actually, he's picked a few, but Butler is the top one. Fouhy picking Middle Swan for a top pick. Jarrad Mahon picking Midland. Bill Childs picking Westminster. Right now, let's jump into the chat with lead research analyst from InvestorKit, Junge, and find out her top pick, bottom pick, and how long she thinks left in the Perth property market. And finally, InvestorKit's lead research analyst, Jungar, the woman that holds the keys to the property data kingdom, shares what she thinks hot and what's not. Jungar, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, very glad to have you on the panel here. I'm sure I'm not the only one. So we're talking Perth, we're talking the top 51 areas under 550 in 2024. And I wanted to jump straight into your top pick on the list. What area are we looking at, Jung?
Yeah, so my topic would be Greenfields.
Greenfields, okay. And why Greenfields?
Greenfields, I do think it features a balance among all the data points, and also the price growth in both the sales markets and rental markets over the last year was quite steady. Compared to many suburbs where the growth trend lines are like, I guess, flattening a bit. But Greenfields, it is not slowing down or showing any signs of slowing down.
Okay, so that's the stability of the area that's really attracting you to it.
I think so.
Okay. And as far as the actual demographics for the area, is there anything around like the median income for the area or portion of renters, anything else like that that you like about it statistically?
Statistically, I think there's nothing really stands out, but like I said, it's more about the balance. Greenfield's renter percentage is 37. It's just average, not extremely high or extremely low. The income level here is actually good. It's a blue-collar suburb. Many of its residents are technicians, trades workers, and they make good money.
Okay.
And in that data you offered me, it says the percentage of more than 30,000 gross weekly income, I guess among all residents or all local household, is just 10%. It's one of the lowest, I guess, across all the suburbs you provided.
All right, so greenfields. And is there anything else you wanted to talk about with this area before we move on to the complete contrast and your bottom pick?
I really wanted to mention something about it. One is the days on market. Days on market has been really low, 14 days. I guess 14 days now. And it has been at this level for more than a year. It's been, I guess, like this, 14, 13, since early 2023, and never been increasing. And in comparison, some suburbs are already seeing days on market going up. That is one thing. So inventory level as well. Now it is half a month of stock on market. I know it can't be the lowest across Perth, but half a month is quite a low level, and it is lower than last year. It's been declining.
So we're essentially talking about two weeks of inventory.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. 2 weeks.
Yeah, wow.
That is very, 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 very low and impressive. Last year it was already low, 0.8 months of stock, but this year is even lower.
Okay. All right, and as far as the opposite, your bottom pick on the list, where are we looking?
Yeah, I'm not sure if anyone else also picked it, because I think it's kind of obvious. I picked Boddington as the bottom. So
Boddington's the bottom pick. And why is Boddington at the bottom of the list for you, Junge?
So Boddington, it is a kind of a remote mining town, quite small. First thing, it has only 387 houses in the town. Not a I guess scaled or a big enough market for investors to pick properties in. And the second thing is, in the past 2 or 3 years, I think prices didn't really grow in that town. Comparing to Perth or other regional WA towns, price surge, it just didn't grow. If you go to the suburb profile of Boddington, you see the last 1 year price growth was -2%.
-2% in the last 1 year?
Last 1 year.
So everything else is going bananas and this is minusing.
Yes, it is unbelievable. I do think it is because of the low demand there. Because it's a mining town, almost everything from the economy to property market is reliant on the gold mine. And as long as there's no additional job opportunities or any attractions to people, the housing demand wouldn't grow. That could be one of the reasons why prices are just not growing.
387 houses. There's never going to be a huge amount of demand, is there? Like, I reckon I know a few people that could buy the whole town just about.
Yeah, low supply, low demand at the same time. And then the other thing, I don't know, maybe it's obvious, is the industry lack of diversity. I checked the lifespan of the current mine should be 20 to 30 years. And it's doing well now, but what about 20 years later or 30 years later? What if there's no new mines anymore? I guess people will just leave. And the town basically will be abandoned.
It's interesting that you bring that up.
That's possible.
Because that is one of the things I think, investing in mining towns, when you're talking about investing in property, is inherently risky for all different reasons. But I find that I've got a little bit of a mining background, and talking about lifespans of mines is something I actually very seldom hear people talk about, because you're right, some mines only have 10 years, 20 years, whereas some mines like Olympic Dam have got I think that's got like 100-year lifespan. So it's like, it's very dead. That's going on for a while. Still not a great reason to invest in a mining town, but it's just that extra layer of risk, I think, that you'd be holding then, like you're saying. If this has only got about 10, 20 years left in it, then, what's happening to those 387 houses afterwards?
Right. Yeah, that's it. So Boddington, my bottom pick.
Anything else you wanted to talk about with in relation to Boddington before we move on to how much heat does the Perth market have left?
Boddington's price didn't grow at all last year. We are seeing really low inventory level there.
Is it even enough of a sample size to collect data properly?
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the thing. That is I guess what I wanted to say. Inventory, although it's a very useful tool or indicator to look at, it's not always reliable. I guess when we analyze property markets, it's important to check everything instead of relying on single data points.
Look at this in isolation and it could send you down the wrong path. Look at it in a correlation to other tools. Well, then it's probably going to be a good tool in your tool belt.
Yeah, that's great summary. That's very great.
Love it. All right, Jungar, the $64 million question I'm asking everyone. How much longer does the Perth market have left?
It's really hard to answer. As for now, I think Perth itself, Greater Perth, I believe the long-term total growth last 10 year, was 25 to 30%, something there. Comparing to the long-term average of the 5 to 6% per year, which is equivalent to maybe 60 to 80% in total, there is still a lot to catch up with. That's a good thing. So what I'm thinking is it's easy to tell that in the coming 1 or 2 years, Perth is definitely going to keep the strong growth. One is because of the high market pressure we're looking at now. And two is that in 2025, probably we will be seeing a reduction or several reductions in the cash rate, and that will probably give the property market another boost. So we might see another wave, big or small, of price growth. And then after those 2 years, as we go into the longer term, there will be more uncertainty and it'll be hard to say. But I would say for Perth, there might be some form of slowdown ahead in the coming 3 to 5 years. But I do think there will be some sort of steady growth ahead.
So what I'm hearing is if we were to do it this way, if I said Perth market's only got 6 months left, you'd disagree, not agree, correct?
I wouldn't, no.
Correct. So if I said it's got 12 months left, you'd still disagree?
I would still, yes.
So if I said 2 years left, is that when you're starting to go, maybe not?
If we're talking about strong growth, I think that would be the maximum term I would agree with.
Okay. All right. So 2, and if I said 3 years left, sounds like your answer might be a bit more like possibly. It could happen, but maybe not quite as strong, if I've understood you right.
Yeah, but as I said, when it comes to longer and longer term,
it gets blurrier.
There's less certainty, so we may want to go and see.
Okay, so the reason I'm asking this way is because I guess I look at this as if anyone's listening to this right now and they're thinking, well, look, I'm just looking at, I don't want to be the last person at the table while everyone else has left and I'm holding the bill, so to speak. So if they're looking at buying it and they're thinking, is everything just about to stop in 3 to 6 months? Whilst no one's got a crystal ball, and well, I'd argue you've got like some kind of data crystal ball, but anyway. But if we're talking the next kind of 6 to 12 months, you're pretty confident that there's still going to be some strong growth there. We're talking the next 12 to 24 months, there's still a good level of confidence. Outwards of 3 years, it starts to get a little bit hazier because there's so many different things that can change in the market, that can change globally, locally, all the rest of it. But if someone's looking at this over the next few years, from what you're seeing, Jung, they should be able to invest in Perth with confidence, providing they're also picking the right area, the right asset, and everything else is coming into it as well.
Right, that is so right.
Brilliant. Junge, thank you so much for jumping on this panel. Is there anything else that you wanted to leave everyone with today as far as the Perth property market or the list?
I think that's all good. Yeah, I think we've covered everything.
Beautiful. Junge Ma from Investigate, thank you so much for jumping on the show. I'm sure we'll see you again soon.
Thank you for having me.
So Junge Ma, Greenfields and Boddington. So we're talking Boddington. I'm pretty sure Bill chose Boddington as well as a low list. But we're talking about an area that isn't as close, which was kind of interesting. I was expecting more of something that's like that kind of 10, 15K radius of the Perth CBD. But she's seeing strength there. And the other big thing that I personally like about this is a common thread that I'm getting from so many people and that you're probably feeling right now as an investor, whether you're at 0 trying to get to 1 trying to get to 2, 5 trying to get to 6, whatever it is, serviceability is a challenge now. So being able to find an area that's got a median house price literally under 500,000, that's mean the median is under 500,000. You start building up some relationships, or you're buying off market someone like Simon or Dawn who's like leaning on some solid relationships that have been built over the years. Or you go to the Investigate team being led by like Junge Ma's lead research analyst. Like it kind of doesn't matter which way you go with this. If you want to do this yourself or you want to do this with BAs in your corner, the serviceability aspect of this is such a key part of it. And being able to get into an area that has a median house price under 500,000, if you can lock something down for 400, 450, it just feels like those are 2 years ago prices. But today, like to timestamp this, I am now recording this on Friday, the 19th of July. This isn't something that you're watching from ages ago, unless you're watching it 6 months, then you are. But I feel like this, hopefully, if this list is used right, if these expert opinions are used right, this could potentially be the difference between breaking through that thought process of it's all over, it's all done, and actually, you know what? I can actually get into the market, or I can actually extend my portfolio. Because all of this, all the property investing side of things comes down to how well can you pick your assets? How many of those assets can you hold over a long-term cycle, over a few cycles? Because it's like the double is amazing. And some of you have just felt that. You bought something for 300, now it's worth 500 or 600. Some of you haven't felt that yet. You're new at property investing and you're looking at the things that are in the 500 and 600 and being like, wow, that's the dream. It doesn't have to be if you follow this kind of stuff. It doesn't have to be if you look in the places the experts are looking. You take the advice from the experts and you build the expert team around you. Whether that's outsourcing every single step of it or whether that's educating yourself and doing most of it yourself, but then maybe going to a mortgage broker, having a chat with Bill Childs, understanding the plan and going, well, look, can you actually tell me the steps from if I buy this, what does it look like next? It's one of the reasons I wanted Bill on this panel. He understands that well. He's literally done it for himself. The dude's like 27 years old, 27, I don't know. You're 20 something. Sorry, Bill. I'm pretty sure you're 27. He's got like a $4.5 million portfolio. And he's done it because he understands the way that if I'm going to buy this one, how does that connect to that one? How does that servicing work? What do I need capital growth wise? So I need to add value to this. Is the market going to add value? My purpose of saying this is whilst this is not financial advice, please seek independent professional financial advice from a qualified professional. Build that team. Use this list. Use these opinions to start shaping the narrative of moving forward, making sure that you've got the right advice in your corner, making sure that you've got the confidence to go, you know what? Maybe I can go again. Because if the market keeps performing the way that it has, which it keeps going, an extra $500,000 investment now could turn into a $4 million asset in 30 years' time. I just want to repeat that. An extra $500,000 investment now could turn into a $4 million asset in 30 years' time. And that is exactly what I want everyone to take from this. Is, as my nan always used to tell me, don't complain about getting old, Todd, because it's better than the alternative. If we're lucky enough to get into our 60s, feels like forever away. Like that, it just feels dumb. But I'm in my late 30s now. It still feels like yesterday I was an 18-year-old running around like an idiot. If we're lucky enough to get there, we're going to want to make sure that we made those choices. And that's exactly what I hope you guys get from this. And if you're wanting more list episodes like this, more panel episodes, personally, I enjoy making this. I think this is great. We've got something tangible we can actually play with, go through, pull apart. We've got experts saying what's good, what's bad. There is so much in episodes like this. If there's something more you're wanting to see or another area or another strategy or whatever it is, comment it below. Tell me. I listen to you guys. I personally read every single comment and it absolutely humbles me how much this channel has exploded. It still feels like yesterday we only had a few hundred subscribers and we're about to click over 10,000 as we're recording now. So with that said, thank you so much for your time. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. My name is Todd Sloan. This is the Pizza and Property Podcast. And as always,
Have yourself an amazing rest of the week. Stay awesome.